And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Thomas Jane, founding member of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance and Hollywood actor who was in movies like Marvel's The Punisher, The Thin Red Line, Deep Blue Sea, and more. He also portrayed Detective Miller in the Netflix series The Expanse, which I can tell you guys is one of my personal favorite shows. And I highly recommend that you watch it, but after this podcast. Thomas, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. This is great. Thank you for having me.
Well, your role in The Expanse, deals with interstellar and advanced space travel. And for those of you who don't know, that's kind of basically what's about, but much more.
Solar system, yeah.
The solar system.
Expanding into the solar system and then hopefully beyond, but yeah.
Well, did working on that series shape your views on UFOs in any way?
It's funny. I've been in the UFOs long before I started the series, and the novels that Ty and Daniel wrote, called The Expanse, were fantastic. And so I asked them. They were, especially Ty, was on set all the time. Daniel came and went, but I got them both in the room, and I said, "Okay, fellas, what's your take on UFOs?" And they're like, "UFOs? That's all bullshit." I'm like, "Are you serious? You guys read all this great stuff. And they didn't know anything about UFOs except for the standard Air Force line, nothing to see here. These are not the droids you're looking for." So that's I never brought it up again.
Did you happen to get like a prop from the show at all to bring home with you?
I brought home the hat.
Oh, you did?
Oh, I had to, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's really what attracted me to the whole thing. I'm a big fan of film noir, and I was always a big fan of Blade Runner, and sort of, putting space and this sort of noir detective into a show. They had me at hello. I was all in.
Has anybody ever approached you to do like those Comic-Con things?
Oh yeah. I do them from time to time.
Yeah.
Every now and then I'll go do an autograph signing and meet some folks, and I've always had fun doing it.
I think that would be super fun. I mean, if I was an actor, I would consider that a success if I could be on a sci-fi movie and get to go sign autographs at Comic-Cons.
I guess you're right. Yeah. I went down to, after The Punisher, I started getting into San Diego, and we had a table. I had a comic book company called Raw Studios, and we put out 3 or 4 books, and I would rent a table at Comic-Con every year. I did that for, I think, 9 years.
Wow.
And it was so much fun. We had a booth. I had a couple of friends who would come help me and set up, and we would sell comics and sign autographs, and we made up T-shirts, and we just had a blast, And this was back in the 20, I'd say from maybe 2008. No, it must have been earlier. 2006, maybe, for about 9 years, and it was still big, but it wasn't it just got out of hand. It just got so overwhelmingly huge. And I've never been a fan of being around. I can handle it for a couple of days, but I've never been a big fan of crowds. So after a while, it just got too big, and I said, I can't do this anymore. This was really fun, and let's find something else to do with my weekend in July.
What I love about The Expanse is I feel that it's the most realistic TV show about space travel than anything else out there. The way the ships kind of move in space and kind of got a fire reverse thrusters. And would you agree with that?
Hard sci-fi, yeah. So it's, I think that's why people dig it. The books were kind of like, what would really happen? Like a couple of 100 years from now, we get this space thing down. We find some next level propulsion, and we can actually start to industrialize space. And so, their imagination went to, the series, this asteroid, the biggest asteroid The asteroid belt that would be colonized. It would be colonized by workers, so blue collar people. But then they'd start to kind of evolve over time, where the lower gravity and dealing with the conditions of living in sort of space bases over time, and then colonizing Mars, and then how these political factions would then start to interact and fight for their freedom. And so I loved how it was taken seriously. Like, what would our first foray into space be like? And then, of course, with your eyes on Interstellar, where do we go after that? And what might we encounter, And I really liked that. My thinking on the UFO thing has evolved in that direction. In some fashion, some version of the Expanse actually happened, with some distant cosmological civilization or some extraplanetary civilization. They didn't just jump in their spaceships and start cruise off to Earth for a look around. That was part of an evolution, So the intelligences that we are encountering on this planet have a history, and they have goals. They have evolution and incredible planetary, civilizational, historical biography of different civilizations. And that's fascinating to me. Obviously, some of these civilizations have met each other. What was that like? I always think about, if the universe has a history, and it appears to, 13.8 billion years, that means that at some point in the universe's history, there was a first civilization that actually developed and stayed alive and became sustainable long enough to create an interstellar civilization, to become interstellar. And then other civilizations were doing the same thing. 13.8 billion years is a huge amount of time. So we don't know how old or young these societies were when they met each other, but at some point they did. We can infer this because we see many different species, races, clades. We don't really know what to call them, but they're different aliens. They appear to be a product of their own evolutionary histories, and yet they're all here. So they must interact, encounter each other, and what those exopolitics are, we really don't know. But I'm fascinated by thinking about who were the first ones. Who were the first ones to branch out and discover, to become adept enough at the physics to be able to travel interstellar in the first place, and then to meet each other. What did something like Star Wars actually happen? How did that go? I'm sure they would find things to trade with each other, information, just as an ethnologist, that's just got to be spectacularly informative. If you're an ethnologist interested in studying animals or studying humans, the way we study tribes in the Amazon, what an incredible treasure trove of information to be able to get to know another civilization, how they overcame the various problems that they had, and what's unique about that civilization, and what's completely different. Like, take the red dwarf, right? So most of the suns out there in the sky are red dwarfs, which is a completely different. If we lived around a red dwarf, my understanding is that it would kind of be like sunset all day long, And then a lot of these planets around red dwarfs are tidally locked to their star, which means they don't spin. So they've got one side, like our moon, one side of the planet is facing the sun at all times. So the idea would be that one side facing away from the sun would be really cold, and then the other side might be temperate, if life was to evolve there. And then I read a study a couple of years ago about cloud cover and how if conditions were right, and because the sun they're tidally locked, the planet and the sun, then a cloud cover may form around the planet and actually make the reverse side more temperate. So some planets, you may still have access to the whole planet, but a lot of them, you're living on a planet where everybody has access to one side of the planet, and just how evolution might deal with that, and how society would evolve based on planetary, geological, and solar conditions.
I don't even know if things would grow on the dark side of the planet without sunlight to work with chlorophyll.
Probably not. But if it was temperate enough, then people would eventually start, sort of colonizing the. And then when your technology gets good enough, it's kind of like the way we send scientists to Antarctica, hang out there. Like people would, but what's fascinating is the mythology. Our mythologies are baked into the fact that we revolve around the sun, that the sun sets and then the sun rises, and this circular sort of thing. It's baked into our myths, the equinox and all this. That's how all that stuff started. The mythology started with the stars, and so they have a completely different mythology? Would they have a completely different concept of sort of birth and death and the cycle of life and all that? Like they may be more unified, and we've got so many different races on this planet because we have so many different climatory conditions, and that creates tension between races. It creates unique cultures. The Eskimos evolved to only eat meat. They're completely carnivorous, so their bodies actually are able. They don't need some of the things that we need. We need plants. They don't. So evolution take all these different sort of various pathways towards intelligence, and I think that's fascinating.
Well, do you believe that the cultural fascination with UFOs ultimately reflects our yearning for our origins and our place in the cosmos?
Place in the cosmos, we are experiencing a neo-Copernican revolution. I think it's Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist, who I think said that this is a neo-Copernican revolution. We spent, thousands of years thinking that the sun revolved around us, and why not? It comes up over there and it goes down over there and it spins around, and that's the way that we sort of created our cosmology. And that when Copernicus, I think he was having trouble with the figuring out when Easter was, because they had trouble figuring out, when Easter should fall every year. So Copernicus was working on that problem, and that's how he gathered the data to say, wait a sec, none of this adds up. I think we're spinning around the sun. And everybody just thought he was completely nuts. And the church said, well, that would mean that we're not the center of the universe. So you're obviously crazy, Copernicus. And it took about almost 200 years for us to finally sort of be able to deal with the fact that we weren't the center of everything. And now we are coming around to the idea that we are not the center of consciousness in the universe, that we are a one We are a grape in a cluster of grapes in a huge vineyard of intelligence, and that's what we're trying to wrap our minds around. I think the biggest problem with that is our sovereignty. It messes with our anthropocentric sovereignty.
Well, do you believe that our physical body creates our consciousness, or our physical body is like a receiver of consciousness, or even one step further, it's a manifestation of our consciousness?
I'm coming around to the third option. It really, and that really is, you nailed it, because that really is the heart of the Neo-Copernican revolution. Not only are we just one among, thousands, millions, who knows, but there's a lot of intelligence out there. We're just one civilization among many. We're one planet. Evolution is cosmological. But not only that, and it makes sense, with Democritus, who figured out the atom. He's the guy that coined the phrase of the atom, that we would live in a material universe. That makes perfect sense. That's where you would start. Creations of God, because we're special, who live in this kingdom of materiality, also created by God. And then science came along and said, no, all that God stuff. We started as amoebas, and we came out of the mud, and that's the Darwinian picture. But to flip that whole thing on its head would be that matter is not the primal substance. The primal substance is consciousness. And our interpretation of this primal proto-consciousness is God. Well, God created everything. This is probably a little bit closer to the truth than the idea that matter, the Big Bang created all the atoms clumped together through gravity, through this magical combination of elements, life, we get life. But when you look at the fine tuning of the universe, the anthropic principle, when you really look at it, it's way beyond coincidence. And that would mean, and this is kind of the puzzle, that would mean that there's some intelligence that's baked into consciousness. And I think, when I think, okay, so what is consciousness? Nobody can seem to define it, but in its essence, consciousness is awareness. It's awareness. It's awareness with the ability to choose, right? So a magnet has a positive and a negative, and it's not going to choose anything. The negative attracts the positive attracts the negative, and that's the way it is to the end of time. There's no choice baked into electromagnetism, right? There's no choice baked into gravity. Things will clump together. But awareness must have some form of choice to be able to choose positive or negative, to be able to push against gravity. This requires choice. And I don't see how life could have started without a fundamental awareness that allows for fundamental particles to actually start to build something out of the elements that we see. And that implies purpose. And that's where science has a really hard time wrapping their minds around the idea of purpose. Because I guess the only, when we think of purpose, we think of living creatures, we think of ourselves, we think of animal. It's hard to think of like a primary purposeful awareness or a proto awareness. I think that is what we're starting to discover. Look, according to the Darwinian view, the humanoid form should be completely accidental. In other words, if you were to rewind evolution on planet Earth and play it all over again, nothing like the humanoid form should ever arise again, because it's a product of random causal pathways over billions of years, right? So when we look at other civilizations, yet they're all humanoid. There's no Darwinian explanation for how random causal pathways on thousands or millions of different planets would all produce the humanoid form. So that's a big problem, for science. So how do you explain that?
Probably somewhere in our galaxy, the humanoid form was seeded, I don't know, millions of years ago, and they have had some sort of interstellar travel where they've kind of seeded this region of the galaxy. Yeah, good question.
Right. Who's they? And, we don't have all the evidence. So there's a couple different explanations. All the aliens that visit us have been described as humanoid beings, but maybe that's just one clade of humanoid intelligence that's interested in other humanoid intelligence, and they don't really bother with the octopoids, over in Clarion. They're so are there other forms of intelligence in the universe that are not humanoid? We don't know. The evidence that we have suggests that all of the aliens visiting us are humanoid.
What about the Greys?
The Greys are humanoid. I mean, when you're looking at the humanoid form, you're looking at 2 arms, 2 legs, fingers and toes, a head with 2 eyes. Look, when science imagines aliens, we would think they would be anything but humanoid. Because evolution should have taken incredibly random. Evolution's random, It's random mutations over millions of years, and some of them are fortuitous enough to be passed along because they give us an advantage. And that's how we ended up with the humanoid form on this planet. But on another planet, other random events would happen, and that would create other fortuitous evolutionary advantages. And they would be passed on, and you should end up with something completely different. In fact, if you did the same thing here on this planet, because what about that big asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs? What if that had never happened? Well, it's very possible that we would be a civilization of reptilian beings. Who knows?
Many people claim to have encountered reptilians and...
Right. And I think it's important to say that when we describe aliens as reptilian or insectoids or insectolins, these are methods of description, and they shouldn't imply descent. In other words, the best way we can describe them is they kind of look like reptiles. They may or may not have anything to do with reptiles as we know them. It's just the best we can do in describing. Now, maybe some colony of insects did somehow evolve intelligence, and that is their heritage. But at this point, we don't know.
Do you truly believe that humans are from Earth? Because, without our brains, we wouldn't survive. We're really a weak animal.
I think that all the options are on the table right now. What we have is a pretty good evolutionary line, from the primate to us. It's not complete. There's gaps, but right now that's the best story. The monkey wrench is when we encounter, or people, experiencers, contactees, they've encountered fully human, not just humanoid, but fully human, humanesque. I call them humanesques. And these people they could put them in a business suit, cut their hair, and we would never know the difference. So what does that mean? There's a couple of different explanations, and we don't know the answer. One is that they're actually us from the future. Another is that they evolved here and then had the technology to leave and go colonize somewhere else. Our planet then went through some cataclysm like 12,000 years ago, and we restarted here on this planet, but they're now coming back from their planet to their home planet to sort of help guide us along, or make sure we don't get out of the garage too early. That's another explanation. Another explanation is that evolution actually does produce fully human-looking people on different planets with their own evolutionary line. That to me is a little bit sort of, I'd put that at number 3, but it's possible.
If humans weren't here, nature is pretty much in balance. Like the mountain lion keeps the deer in check and the deer keeps such and such in check. But when you add humans to the mix, we just kind of start throwing a monkey wrench into the whole system, and things do get out of balance. Like, for example, here in Texas, since humans took out the mountain lion, we have an overpopulation of deer. So the state asks people with land to please hunt a deer or whatever a year to kind of keep things in balance.
Tasty deer too.
Yeah.
I think that's a product of self-awareness. Oh, if awareness is sort of primary, then there's a little bit of awareness in every living thing. There has to be, right? They're aware enough to be able to find food and run from danger. That's awareness. There's no other way to cut it. That's awareness. Mm-hmm. This awareness, we're not finding any special sauce that separates any living thing from another. And we still haven't landed on quite what leaves the cell when it dies. What's the difference between a dead cell and an alive cell? We don't know. Well, what's lost is awareness. And this awareness eventually gets complex enough to create self-awareness. And that means that we can choose to do things that, we reshape rivers, we chop down trees, we start building cities, we start interrupting the natural balance. That's a problem. And then we're like, gee, we can't seem to stop throwing all our garbage into the ocean. Somebody ought to do something about this, but nobody knows what to do. We're obsessed with making garbage. It's what we do on this planet. We make trash. We build roads to carry the trash. We've got boats to take the trash to China. We burn the trash, but essentially everything we make ends up in the trash heap at some point. Yeah. So that's what we do. We're trash makers. And then we have wars over who gets to control the trash. And then now you've got a whole system, makes some people very rich.
Yeah.
But we don't know how to stop it. And if we keep it up, we're not going to be able to survive the way we're going. Dr. James Harder was a hydraulic engineer, and he was also the scientific research director of APRO. APRO was the oldest ufological organization, started in 1952, I think. And it was run by Jim and Carol Lorenzen. They were one of the only people to take humanoid encounters seriously. So Harder worked with contactees. And he worked with about 100 during his career. And he divided the aliens into 2 camps. They're kind of the transients. The people who seem to behave like scientists. They kind of came, they hung out for a little while, they might grab a specimen and they have these crazy encounters and then they take off and they're never reported again in the literature. Some come back, some seem to, we do have, like the Michelin Man there was a wave of all over the world. These contactees would describe them as kind of like in these Michelin Man type spacesuits, and we have several encounters of that. But then there's another group who seem to be more permanent, and that's the grays, the praying mantises, the reptoids, which I still have trouble with, but too many people are reporting them, and the fully humanesque, beings. And it seems to be that they're here at this time for a reason. This sort of peak technology. We're kind of running into some serious problems. We're sort of running out of road here. If we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to run out of road. I think unless we decide to, blow ourselves up with the nuclear weapons, which I don't think is ever going to happen. We're not going to, I think the planet's going to be fine. The planet's got millions of years of habitability left to it, but we're not, I think we're in trouble. So I think we're in some sort of, Jacques Vallée called it a control system, where we're being guided, managed, and maybe suppressed, make sure that we don't get a hold of too much technology too soon and then cause problems on other planets. And I think it might be a combination of all of those things. That's kind of what's fascinating me right now, is the control system, why it exists, why now, and what are they doing? What do they want? What's the goal?
Do you think we're ready for disclosure?
We'll never be ready. It's kind of like, when I had, my daughter's 22 now, and I was not ready when, me and my wife got pregnant. I was not ready. It's a transition, and you take it a day at a time. What's in front of you? You got to change that diaper. Now I got to feed the kid again. Now I got to enroll her in school. It's a process, and who knows where it's going to lead? But it's already begun. It's already begun. I think that we're seeing an acceleration now because of our technology. It's our digital communication device that's putting us all into much more intimate contact than we've ever been before. So the secret becomes a lot harder to hide. So now they've got to bite the bullet, and they're like, how are we going to disclose but still stay in control of the narrative, right?
Yeah.
That's where we're at right now. And it looks like we're getting really close. Most people still aren't taking this seriously. But what was amazing is those 3 congressional hearings, now people are actually aware of it. So it's this process of gradual awakening. It's a great time to be alive, I got to tell you.
I agree. Now,
some people say that we chose to be alive during this time.
You've had your own sighting, right? Can you tell us about it?
I've had experiences, yeah, that I'm trying to wrap my mind around. I've had a few interesting. After I had an experience about 14 years ago now, and I was a normal person with, completely forgotten all about this stuff. I mean, I was into it as a kid, but there was a show in the 70s called Project UFO, and it ran for 2 seasons. And they took Project Blue Book files and they sort of dramatized Project Blue Book. But at the end of every episode, it would turn out to be a weather balloon or an airplane
or swamp gas.
and it worked. It actually worked. I thought, oh man, that's a bummer. I wish we lived in a world where something cool like that would happen. And I think that most kids are open to that kind of thing, and the control system did the job it was meant to do. And I completely forgot about all that stuff until I had my own encounter. And then it just, from one day to the next, I had questions, I was like, what the hell was that? And that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole. And I'm not alone. There's millions of people who are now having these experiences, and they're having them daily. Every day, somebody who thinks that all this is nonsense goes outside or is driving down the road, and they see something that they absolutely cannot explain. So I think that's the process. It's a gradual process of slow awakening to the truth. And it's really makes a lot of sense. When you remove all the bias that has been put in place by science and by government, when you remove the bias, it makes a lot of sense that we wouldn't be the only creatures, and that intelligence would eventually develop the technology to travel the stars. Why wouldn't you? If it's possible, you'll do it. Even if it took years or decades, people would do it. People do crazy shit. They do really crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. So even if you could just travel, at light speed, and it took you, somebody would put together a generation ship.
Well, what did you see? You're not giving me any details here.
No, I don't talk about. I'm not interested in putting another story. I might write about it. I might tell the story once on paper, and then be done with it. Look, it's kind of like having a religious awakening. It really is. When you really have a true anomalous experience that's in reality, that you can't explain in any other way, right? There's no other good explanation for what happened. Then that event becomes the fulcrum around which the rest of your life revolves. So the closest thing I can compare that to would be some kind of religious awakening. So that becomes sacred to me, personally.
In what way did you change?
Everything changed overnight. And I started at the beginning. I was like, how do I prove to myself that this wasn't real? And then I started looking for answers. And I started doing things that I've never done before. Like, personally, I've never talked to a psychic before. I was like, oh, okay, I'll talk to a psychic. Let's see. I was open to all possibilities and any suggestions. And the thing that had the most evidence, that resonated, that made the most sense in physical reality. Hey, if I grew up as a church-going person, I may have thought angels, and that would fit right in with my cosmology, and I would tell my family about that time that I was visited by angels. But that wasn't part of my. I wasn't going to accept that. It just wasn't part of the way I was raised, or the way my brain works. My dad worked with biogenetics, and he started genetics companies in the 70s and got in on the ground floor. So he worked with all kinds of different scientists, and so we came from a rational scientific household, and so that's where I started. But then you just lift up the cover a little bit, and there's this sea of information and history that we've been contacted for 8 decades and beyond. And it gets murky really quick. But I like to try to stick with what we can actually say. There's a lot of different theories, and and people have different pieces of the puzzle. People who've had near-death experiences will have different pieces of the puzzle, and I do think it's part of the same puzzle. I think that consciousness is way more than we think it is, and I think that as civilizations advance, they become aware of this, and they're able to actually create technology using consciousness. You know, we make stuff out of wires and electricity. Well, one day we're gonna start using, instead of electricity, we're gonna start using consciousness. We're gonna figure out a way how to capitalize on a natural feature of the universe, the way we've always done. So other civilizations are using consciousness in their technology, or using their technologies in consciousness. And I think that the near-death experiences are an extension of the, you could call it a non-local information field that we're all a part of. There is no plausible explanation for consciousness as originating from the brain. You know, there's no version of a universe as big as it is and as old as it is where we are the only little conscious bubbles, light bulbs in the universe. That's really, really unlikely. So one of the things, you know, when we start accepting that there are other intelligent civilizations out there, you're like, wow, you know, this consciousness thing is probably primary.
Let me ask you this. No matter what social media platform you get on, you're going to find conflicting narratives and claims within the UFO community. How do you personally navigate this, and what type of red flags do you look for?
Anybody that claims to know anything.
Anything.
Yeah, it narrows it down pretty quick. You know, you have to be able to build a narrative that's founded in things that we actually know. And the problem is it gets murky really quickly. You know, we're story builders. We're narrative building machines. That's how we built civilization, from the stories that we tell each other, right? That's the glue that we use to tell the story of ourselves and our society. And there's, you know, millions of stories that people use. So it's kind of like pareidolia, you know, it's we'll see faces and everything. It's the same thing. We'll build a story out of anything. So you have to be conscious of that and be wary of when you're confabulating and when you're not. And there's nothing wrong with confabulation or putting the pieces together or hypothesizing, but your hypothesis should be based in, you know, it should be founded in as concrete of actual knowledge, you know, as you can. That's why we still have no consensus as to whether consciousness originates in the brain or it's a fundamental feature of the universe, like almost like a fifth force, you know. I think it's the first force, personally. But I say that because we don't have an answer. All of the evidence is easily attributable to a primary consciousness. There's nothing that I've seen that contradicts that. Now, you could say quite a lot of that. You could say about the opposite. You know, most of the evidence we have for consciousness originating in the brain, there's a good case to be made for that. But when you start factoring in the voluminous intelligences in the cosmos, and you have to figure, like, you know, you could probably put together a couple of hundred different species that have visited us, or descriptions of different species. You know, I'd say there's probably a good couple of hundred different sort of alien races. And then you add remote viewing to that recipe, you know. So without any technology, talented people can use their brains to access information that's remotely, right, around the world. They can even do it in time, which is fascinating. So to me, that points to a non-local consciousness that we're sort of tapped into. And then you get into the incredible evidence we have for psi phenomena over the last 100 years, and we have so much of it. Someone did a meta-analysis not too long ago and found, an incredible positive sort of correlation between all the different data that's been collected over the last 100 years. And you look at it and you say, there's a real phenomenon here. So all of that tells me that it's more likely that consciousness is primary, that we're kind of it's a teleological approach, and science has a hard time with that. I think we need to redefine what we mean when we say purposeful.
Do you think that collectively we are God?
Yeah, I mean, consciousness, God is the best way that we can describe a non-local consciousness that interpenetrates everything and actually gives rise to the material universe. And that connected, just like the neurons in our brain, that builds this network of intelligence. And that network of intelligence is a hell of a lot smarter than any one of us. And it also, it carries within it the purpose to create life, to create, novelty. Terence McKenna said the universe is a machine that creates novelty. And there's a lot of truth in that.
I'm not sure of what projects you're working on, but if you ever had to direct a film on UFOs, what kind of perspective would you bring that you think needs to be told that isn't being?
We need to start telling the real stories and the way they kind of really happened. We need to start excavating our history. Roswell is a fantastic, a lot of meat on that bone, so that needs to be done. Again, Martin Sheen did it in the 90s, but that can be, there's a hell of a lot more information we have now that can tell that story. That's a story that needs to be told. I have a script, a very good script, about Pascagoula, the 1973 Charles Parker and Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker's abduction, in Pascagoula. That's a fantastic story. J. Allen Hynek interviewed them. I think Harder interviewed them as well. They were just a couple of iron workers, fishing, and they got abducted with this incredible craft, came down, and they got brought aboard the craft, and they were terrified, like nothing like that would ever happen. They had no knowledge of any kind of UFO, alien stuff. That 1973 blew their mind, and then they got thrust into the spotlight, where they were on all the tabloids and all the news stations would come bother them where they were working, and it just became this thing, and it blew up their lives. And that interaction, that human interaction with the phenomena and how we react as a society, is a story that needs to be told. The other story, well, there's a lot of it. Dale Spar, who was a cop in the 60s, and him and his partner chased a UFO over, I think, 2 states. And that was a story that blew up and ruined their lives. It's another great story. Someone should do the Travis Walton story again. I'd love to see that updated. And there's a great story to be told with the abduction phenomena and the hybrid breeding program that there's a lot of evidence for. What's going on there? Why are they making these hybrids that look perfectly human and embedding them in society? The work of Dr. David Jacobs, especially his last book called Walking Among Us. That's a great story. And that's I think in that story, you'd center around a suburban housewife who's got a couple of kids, and she's one of them's in high school, and she's sort of thrust into this abduction program, and how does her family deal with that? How does her husband? How does she explain that to her husband? What does that do to the relationship? And what's going on with these fully human hybrid kids who are basically teenagers, and they're human. They're made out of human stuff, but they're working with or for an alien intelligence. So they're kind of serving two masters, because they're being integrated into human society, and yet they're not of human society. And as if young people, they've got sexual urges, they've got rage, there's all that turmoil that goes on, and in the kids, would be great to dramatize. So I would say taking the real stories and dramatizing them in a way that remains true to the real phenomenon. We have a lot to learn. And if we take the subject seriously and not Hollywood it the way they did with Fire in the Sky, which, great movie, but they didn't know how to deal with the aliens, and they didn't tell the story of Travis's experience on board the ships. So there's a lot to respect about the stories that we need to tell.
I don't want to get you into trouble, but overall, do you feel that Hollywood is contributing to the phenomena or misrepresenting it?
Well, we exist within a control system. The CIA has it's just well known. CIA has its hands in all kinds of stories like this. Like anything to do with the military, the CIA is going to have a hand in how that story is represented. So that's part of the control system, the human control system. What's interesting is we citizens are kind of caught between these two control systems. One is a government created by the dark state that has been secretly siphoning money out of our taxes and created this breakaway infrastructure that's way more vast than any of us can wrap our minds around. And they've been able to do it because they have this secret that they're protecting, and they have a faux, loyalty to. They say they're protecting human society, and I don't think that's true. I think they're protecting themselves, and making a hell of a lot of money doing it, and creating a secret infrastructure that probably is interacting with these other beings in some form. So we're being suppressed on that side, and on the other side, whatever this alien control system is, we're also being affected by that.
Did you happen to catch any of the interview with Tucker Carlson and Catherine Austin Fitts?
Brilliant. I've been following Catherine's work for years. She is a brilliant woman. If anyone hasn't seen it, they should watch that immediately. Catherine's doing God's work.
How do you feel about her talking about all these underground cities being built?
She is absolutely telling the truth. We have an enormous underground network. And, the rumors you hear about building high-speed trains and all that, I haven't seen anything that could disprove such a thing. And of course they would do that. This is the price of secrecy, It's human nature.
As we spoke before recording, I was telling you about a guest that I had recently talking about a potential extinction event that's coming. Do you think that that's the reason for building these tunnels and cities underground?
Absolutely. It's at least superficially the excuse. It's the continuity. It started as continuity of government. And it started with the threat of nuclear war. And they had every, reason to start building secret underground facilities and harden them against the nukes. And that has slowly grown, and it's merged with, in my opinion, the dark state. And so we've built this technology. I think it's, for a long time, I couldn't figure out whether or not we had the technical ability to recreate anti-gravity and stuff like that, and zero-point energy, right? Basically an energy source that you can suck out of the vacuum, which exists all around us. And that science has said is, impossible. It's not impossible at all. I think it's kind of hard to wrap. It was hard for me to wrap my mind around the suppression of science that has been going on for at least 50 years. And I think that part of that comes from the fact that we had crashed alien vehicles that we were trying to reproduce. But if you look at the work of T. Townsend Brown and then and Andrew Babson, Babson and Bainson, who were studying anti-gravity in the 50s. Another guy named George Trimble, who has also created a group of physicists that were studying anti-gravity. Nick Cook's book, The Hunt for Zero Point, goes into this in detail. But there's every indication that we were well on our way to figuring out this whole anti-gravity thing. And that's intimately related to being able to tap zero-point energy, because you need a lot of energy, apparently. And these things could be used to the good of humanity, but they would also sort of disrupt the system. I think most of your listeners are well aware of this. I think that we have been able to reverse engineer the technology. And I think that a good reason that we're not using it is because of the oil and gas. But another good reason is that we may have a moratorium by the aliens themselves. In other words, the crashes may not have been so accidental. And by gifting us, and Diana Pasalka says that she was told that some craft were donations. We were gifted this stuff. And I think that as one of the guidelines around using it was, you're not going to, here, you can use this stuff and we'll show you how it works and all that. But you can't use it for war, and you can't use it to hurt people. Can't use it for control. So one of the things they can use it for is building their little breakaway civilization. And I think they're using zero-point energy and anti-gravity and all that fun stuff in their own little sequestered breakaway civilization. And they're following the protocols that I think were probably set by the aliens. So they're not using it to take over the world. But what they should be, using it for is moving human society up a rung on the ladder, and create a new paradigm, a new energy paradigm. Everything starts with energy. If we create a new energy paradigm, that will create the shift in consciousness that we need. It'll help us clean up everything. It'll set us free.
Without saying it, I think you're saying that ultimately disclosure is up to them, not us.
I think that we're overdue. There is a sense that aliens are in control of disclosure, because obviously, they could arrange to just kind of hang out over some Walmart parking lots all over the world, and by Monday morning we would know what was up. So in that sense, they're in control of disclosure. But I also think that they're giving us the opportunity to do it our way, I think they're smart enough to not give us any advice, because we don't need any advice. If we wanted to change the world, we know exactly what to do. But they are I think we might be under some sort of time limit, because our technology, we're getting too good at what we do to stay walled off from the cosmological community, and there's a point where, look, we're not in control. The biggest wall is to give up our anthropocentric sovereignty. Human beings make the rules because we're the smartest thing on the planet. We control all the animals, and God leaves us alone. You believe in God, but there's no good evidence for miracles. And as far as we know, he doesn't blatantly get involved with the works of man. If we want to, kill 60 million people in 4 years, we can do that. God doesn't come down and go, that's not very nice, stop it. So we're in control. And that is no longer the case. If we admit that there are older, wiser, smarter, more technologically advanced, intelligent people out there who actually, come from this incredible cosmic ecology that's way older than humanity. So it kind of knocks us down a peg. And I think aliens respect that. They're like, we're not here to tell you what to do, but you got to get with the program. It's time for you guys. You're advanced enough technologically that if you want to continue to move forward, it's now time to step into the next level of reality, which is that you're part of a community, And I think the aliens so far have left it up to us. And that sounds really weird. I just said the aliens have left it up to us. Like the stuff that comes out of my mouth, sometimes I'm shocked by. But it's, that's the way it is.
I think that the only way the human race can make the transformation is if they reveal themselves to us, because that will change everything.
Yeah, it absolutely will change everything. And if we don't, there's two ways to do this. There's the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is the authority figures that we trust tell us what's going on. That's the easy way, Then it's humans dealing with humans. The hard way is when we blow past deadline after deadline until the aliens just go, you know what? You've had your chance. You didn't do it. Now it's up to us. That's the hard way. That way is going to be tough because everybody's going to have their own interpretation of what it means to have suddenly, some people are going to be like, oh my God, thank you, take me home. And then other people are going to be like, oh my God, Satan and the archons are here to suck on our souls. So that's going to be tough. And it's going to be tough for the government to get a grip. And then you're looking at lockdowns and curfews and violence in the streets and people jumping out of buildings. And it's going to be really tough. And the aliens don't want us to do that. I mean, and which should tell us something a little bit about their motivations. I'm not a fan of the good ET, bad ET dichotomy. I think that's a human construct, and it's really hard not to overlay our human mythology and function and the way we understand the world onto aliens. But we really should try to refrain from that. We don't know. And by the way, good aliens here to for the promotion of life in the universe, right? Here to be negentropic, they're here to make sure that as much life as possible has every opportunity to grow, might wipe us out. Just be like, you guys are a mess. And overall, you make way more trouble than you make good. So if you didn't exist, humans, the universe would be better. So the good aliens might be here to wipe us out. The bad aliens might be like, hey, let's party. You like to take here. I'll give you some spaceships. Come with us to this other planet and help us take over this other planet. Like we shouldn't be so quick to decide who's good and who's bad at all. And in my opinion, neither should we overlay any of that on the world.
What do you think about Hayama Shed's statements about there being a galactic federation and things like that?
Yeah, it's really tough. You know, Galactic Federation is one of those concepts that if it didn't exist, I would be surprised. When you get disparate groups of intelligence and they decide to work together, they're going to have some guidelines. And before you know it, you've got yourself a federation. But the concept of what that federation is, what their goals are, how they operate, we don't have any references. I mean, the references that we do have may be inadequate to really wrap our minds around what we mean when we say a galactic federation. But I would be surprised if something like that didn't exist. And I do think they have interacted with our leaders. I don't think, there's the 1953, Eisenhower was whisked away from Palm Springs and went to Edwards Air Force Base, and he met with the aliens, and they were apparently Nordic aliens. And they said, if you guys give up your nukes, then we'll give you some really cool, technology. And Ike said, "No, we're not going to give up our nukes." I think something like a meeting probably did happen, and probably happened a few times. But I also think that aliens would be smart enough to know that we would never give up on our nukes. It's not happening. They're not dumb, But I do think that they may have put a moratorium on the technology. They've already given it to us by 53, by the way. We already had at least 3 and probably more examples of UFO technology by 53. So we were well on our way to working it out. I think a more plausible scenario would be a meeting would go something like, hey, you've got our technology. We gave it to you. We gave it to you because we understood that you would figure this out anyway, eventually. So, but we just want you to know, like, this is some really powerful stuff. And you will not be using this in war. You will not be putting nukes on the moon, which is, what was the plan at one time. You will not be weaponizing space. And you are part of a cosmic community, and there's a few guidelines that you need to be aware of. So here's the technology. We're not hiding anything from you. Use it wisely, or we will take it away from you. And of course, we would listen, because we know what they could do.
Do you think that that is the reason why we don't want other countries getting nukes, because they won't know how to use them or not use them, and they're afraid of the ETs doing something about it if they do?
Other countries getting nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
Well, nuclear weapons is just bad for, you want to keep as few countries as possible with the nukes. It's already tough enough with the people that have them.
Right.
To try to negotiate. Imagine if you had 60 countries at the, nuclear treaty, it would be a real problem. So just keeping that to a minimum is the safest bet, because who knows what crazy dictator is going to get a hold of some country in 10 years. They might be friendly now, and then some maniac gets into power, and, then we've got a lot more to worry about. Nukes are our problem. The real technology is the 0-point anti-gravity stuff. And that's one of the big problems, and you don't need plutonium. In fact, I think if you're a talented engineer, you could probably create some 0-point energy machine in your garage. In fact, I think it's been done. I think that we have had a real, look at Marinoff, Eugene Marinoff. I mean, there's a dozen guys who have created technology that could have changed the world. And most of those guys are dead. They were murdered. Stanley Meyer with his water car, he was able to separate hydrogen and oxygen using a simple process and run machinery off of the hydrogen, a car. That technology disappeared. So we have the technology. I don't think aliens, gave us anything that we wouldn't have figured out. Maybe a little bit. Maybe they gave us some crib notes and a booster shot um, in order to control it, really. So part of the suppression might be coming from them as well.
I've had quite a few guests, and I'm getting more as it goes, that claim to have been part of the secret space program. Are
Yeah, this is
you
weird.
are you aware of that? And if so, what is your take on it?
The most interesting evidence comes from Gary McKinnon. I believe McKinnon. I believe that story. I've listened to him in interviews. He's telling the truth as far as I'm concerned. And of course, we would start building our little secret space fleet. I think that there's definitely guidelines, things that we're allowed to do with our secret space fleet and things that we're not allowed to do. And I think that we follow whatever guidelines, call it the Galactic Federation, has given us, because they're a lot more powerful than we are. But yeah, we're getting to the point where this bifurcation of society cannot be sustained. We're either going to have to find a way to merge these two societies that have been created because of the secrecy, or one of them has got to go. And right now, this breakaway civilization has the power. They have more money and they have better technology. So that's not a good sign. So I think that disclosure is actually a fight for our civilization. It's not it's an existential fight, literally. It's not a philosophical discussion about sort of, the Copernican sort of like argument over who's revolving around who. Ultimately, I still have to put my pants on in the morning and go to work, I think this is a much more consequential and existential fight. I think we're fighting for our civilization. And I think that that's why it's so important. And I think that's why we're getting so much resistance from the people who want to hang on to what they've got, the breakaway civilization. I think it's a lot more consequential than we're being led to believe at this point.
Well, to switch gears a little bit here, you're going to be presenting at Contact in the Desert, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to be talking about?
I'll be talking about this stuff for sure. I'm interested in just exactly what we've been talking about the past 10 minutes. What are the stakes? What are we really fighting for? Who are the players? What's going on to the best of our ability to discern? And what does it mean for us? And I think it's a lot. I think the stakes are a lot higher than most people realize at this moment. But I think that we will become aware, and quickly. I think we're overdue. I think that we're not as far along in the process as we should be, according to the guys who gave us that technology 80 years ago. And so if I'm right, then the drone situation that we had back at the end of 2024 would have been call it a wake-up call or a reminder, to, hey, we control the ball here. I think we're slacking, and they put on a little show, and it's still going on. It's out of the media now, but they have no explanation for where those drones came from, and they're still happening. And we may see another wave, here in the near future. But I think that was like a little reminder, like, get your act in gear, because it's time. We can't, with AI coming online, we're heading in two directions. One, it's going to bring us together, and the other is 1984 totalitarian takeover. And right now, that's the one that our controllers That's the one that they're kind of leaning toward. They're like, well, we'll just have to lock everybody down, if they want to stay in power, because we're looking at really a revolution in the power structures of the world. That's what we're looking at. And there's a way to roll that out slowly, but it has to begin to start.
Well, you're working on a book called A Human's Guide to Advanced Visiting Aliens, right?
A Human's Guide to Visiting Aliens.
To Visiting Aliens. I had that title wrong. Do you have a timetable for when that's going to be out?
I'm editing the book. I've been wrestling with this book for a long time, but I've committed to getting it done. I want to get it done before the 6-month mark of this year. And then I want to get the book out there. Mm-hmm. I'll probably self-publish it because I don't want to wait a year. When you get a publisher, then you kind of get in line in this factory, and it takes about a year. But I don't want to wait till next year. I want the book to come out this year.
Well, that's a good
I think next year we might be living in a totally different world.
Well, at least that gives me a good reason to have you back to talk about your new book.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's tough to come up with stuff that hasn't been written about a lot. But I have done that. Get into some stuff that I feel is maybe underserved in this community for people who are interested in this kind of thing. And so I think I have something to add to the conversation.
I believe you have something that's coming out on Amazon Prime or something in July.
I've got a Western coming out. It's called Frontier Crucible. That'll come out this year. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of fun making a Western. My last Western was just #1 on Netflix. It's called Murder at Yellowstone City. And I'm looking to do another one. So we've got one coming out this year, and then I want to get another one in the pipe. I'm having a lot of fun making Westerns right now.
Isn't there something that takes place in Australia or something like that?
So that's a show called Troppo.
Yeah, that's it.
Season 2 came out, I think, last summer. It did well. It made it to #4 on Amazon Prime. It was in the top 10 for 2 months. So that did really well. But then Amazon went through some kind of upheaval or something. So season 3 is now in limbo. I'm not really sure where that's going to end up, but I produced that show. I directed a couple of the episodes of Troppo and had a really good time making that drama based on a series of books by Candace Fox. So we got another book by Candace called Gathering Dark, and we just set that up at MGM. And we have a pilot just came in. It's terrific. We'll be going out to actresses next week. Gathering Dark. Candace writes tight, character-driven crime dramas. And she did a great job with Gathering Dark. It's 3 female leads. One's a criminal, one's a lawyer, one's a cop. And takes place in LA, so that should be fun.
Well, Thomas, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Look, this is, there is no greater time to be alive than right now. We are going through the most consequential transformation that human society has ever seen. So to be a part of that, to be a positive part of that in any way that we can can only sort of help the cause and help us get to where we need to go. So spreading the word, having these conversations, turning more people on to conversations like this on your podcast is consequential, actually. So I think for a lot of people, this may have started out as kind of a distraction or an entertainment. It's actually quite a bit more than that. So we're actually part of something very unique and special in human history right now.
Thomas, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.